Hi, I'm Cassie DeRiddle. I'm a 6-year 4-H member from Center Township, and I've been in decoupage for 6 years. So for this, we're going to be showing you how to make this coaster. This is what I did for my first year in decoupage. So first, let's start with the supplies. For the supplies, you're going to need some type of Mod Podge. There are several types that you can use. For this, I use the gloss. It gives you a shiny coat, but you can also use the matte that gives you more of a dull coat. You're also going to be needing foam brushes. These help you give a smooth layer onto whatever your project is. You're going to be needing several of these. You can use any paper you want. For this, I'm using cardstock. It is a more firm paper. I've used tissue paper in the past. You can use wrapping paper if you feel like. Another thing we're going to need is sandpaper. This is just one type of the grits. There's multiple. The lower the grit, the rougher the surface is. This is a tacky cloth. This helps get a little dust, dirt, and whatever else is on the surface of your project off, so there's no bumps in your project. Lastly, you're going to need something to decoupage on. For this, we are using a tile and we're changing it into a coaster. So the first step is to clean off your tile. I'm going to use a damp paper towel to get any dirt or dust off. Then I'm going to take another paper towel and dry it off. And lastly, you're going to take a tacky cloth to get off any dust or dirt that you did not get off first. This will help there be no bumps on the surface. For this project, I dumped some of the Mod Podge onto a paper plate so I'm not re-sticking the brush that might have some dust or dirt into the jar, so the glue won't be ruined. I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to dip it lightly into the glue, and I'm going to do a very thin layer onto the tile. Make sure when you're doing this that you get the edge all the way down. Long, smooth strokes is the best way to do this, so there's no bumps. Make sure you smooth it out and that there's no glue causing bubbles underneath the paper. Once you get a smooth layer on the tile, you're going to take your paper. I cut mine about under 4 inches, so there's a little edge on the tile, and you're going to carefully lay it onto the tile, making sure the sides are even. When doing this, you also want to make sure you flatten it out so there are no bubbling on the sides or corners. Sometimes the glue you will not get it there, so sometimes you have to take just the corner and carefully flatten out some more glue and push it down. As you can see, there is no bubbling on the sides, so this will help you later on. So I did this before, so I already have one with just the paper on it. Here it is. So after the glue dries, make sure it completely dries on the bottom. You're going to take the brush. If your brush has dried with glue on it, make sure you get a new one, but since I've already made a tile and the glue is still good on the brush, we can use the same brush. So we're going to dip it in, and you're going to do the same thing, making sure you get the sides and all the corners. Long, smooth strokes is the best way to go. This one doesn't have to be as thin since it's going on top and not putting the paper on. Just make sure it's long and smooth. Make sure you're getting all the sides and all the corners. After this one dries, you will do this again 10 to 15 times, depending on the thickness of your paper. When doing strokes, so after this one dries, I would do my strokes the other way to make sure that the grooves aren't as deep. So before I started this live, I did do one with 20 coats. No, I did one with 10 coats on it to begin. So this is the one with 10 coats. I did the brush strokes in all different directions, and we're going to sand. So when sanding, you always want to start with the lowest grit. This will help get the rougher grooves out, all the little bumps that you can feel on your decoupage. You can tell what it is by looking at the back. You can see that it is an 80. So for this, we're going to go lightly across because we don't want to get down into the paper, because then you'd have to start over, and we don't want to do that. So we're going to carefully get out all those rough spots. You can casually stop and look to see what spots need more. So I can see that I haven't gotten up here, so I'm going to do that again. Small circles, just trying to get all angles smooth. So once you feel that you got more of the rough ones out, you're going to put your lower grit aside and grab the next grit. This one is 120. Again, you can tell by looking at the number. And you're going to do the same thing with 80, except a little rougher to try to get them out. Again, depending on how many pieces of paper you use, sometimes people will stack paper, so like have different layers. Those will take more Mod Podge, so instead of just doing 10 layers before you sand, you definitely want to do more layers, because otherwise you'll get to the paper faster. But since this is one layer, we can only have to have 10 and sand it pretty tough. If you have any questions, I can answer those. Now I'm looking at it and it feels pretty smooth. So we're going to go to the next grit. This one is 320, but we actually want to use the 220 because that one's a little rougher than the 320. So again, the same thing, just trying to get out all those little bumps. We want to have it smooth to the touch. I can see that the corner up here has a little more, so I'm going to go over here. Again, you're going to look from all angles so you can see, because sometimes from one angle it will look good, but then you look again and you can see the grooves. Another way is by feeling it. I can feel up here, it needs a little more. So I'm going to go up again. So I'm done with the 220, so we're going to do the last grit for this one, which is 320. This will be getting all the little bumps out since we already got the deeper grooves. Sometimes you'll realize that you missed a spot, so don't be afraid to go back through the grits. You don't have to keep going up and expecting that the 320 is going to get out those deeper grits. You can always go back to 80 and redo all these steps just in case you feel like you missed some. At this point, I also like to take my damp paper towel and wipe it down just to see, without all the dust on it, to see what it looks like. You could use a hand sander. I prefer doing it by hand. Hand sanders are also, I've done it before. They're a little rougher on it and it gets to the paper faster. This you can kind of tell by yourself, like, okay, it's getting closer, I probably need to stop. But hand sander, when you're using it, it's just a lot rougher. And if you get to the paper, then you have to start over. So I prefer to do it like this. You can with the other one, depending on how many layers you have on it and how much bigger. But since this is a coaster, I would definitely prefer hand sanding it. So I'm going to look at it, and I think this one's pretty good. I see a few grooves left, but again, this is only the first. This is the first 10 layers, so this one does not have to be perfect because we're going to continue putting more and more layers on. So after you're done sanding, you're going to get your damp paper towel once again and wipe it off to make sure that there's no little dust, no dirt, because if there is, even the smallest little dust particle can cause a bump in the glue. So then you will want to dry it, because otherwise there will be clumps when you're trying to glue. And now after we're done sanding for the first time, it is time to put 10 to 15 more layers on. So once again, since I went the other way the last time, I'm going to go this way and just do a pretty thick coat. It doesn't have to be too thin, but make sure there's not too much glue. When you're doing this, also make sure, say after this one I wanted to do it again, make sure the layer is completely dry. Otherwise, when you're doing glue, it will peel up the glue again, and that is never good. That'd be a lot of sanding to try to get down all those little layers that came back up. When doing this, I also like to keep track of how many coats I've done, because otherwise you'll lose track and you want to make sure you know how many you're doing. When you are doing layers and you might see a little speck in the middle, you can always, like you saw me do, take your finger and just take it out if it hasn't dried yet, and then just smooth it back over. You can use fabric. Fabric is thicker, so you would definitely have to do a lot more sanding and a lot more layers, but yes, you can use fabric. Oh, there is special Mod Podge for different types of material. Fabric, there is a thicker one, I'm pretty sure, that you can use. Okay, so the next step, we're going to say that I've done 10 to 20 more. This one's the final coat. Okay, so this is the one. So we're going to say that this one, I did do 20 coats on this before while we're letting the other ones dry. And this is the time where you would go through all the grits once again. So I'm going to start with 80, like I did before, and this one we're going to sand again. This is the last layer before the final coat, so this is definitely the one you want to be a lot more tough with. You want to make sure that all the grooves are out, because this is your final sanding. There's no more sanding after this. Okay, I'm going to keep going up through the different grits. Now, since this is the last time we're sanding on just the Mod Podge, I'm going to do a wet sand. So I'm going to take my damp paper towel and I am going to dampen it. Usually we'll dampen it and then we'll dry it off to sand again, but this time we're going to keep it damp. And we're going to take out, this is an 800 grit, This is going to make it very smooth and get rid of all the little tiny bumps. It'll be very smooth to the touch. So while it's still damp, you're going to sand it. I do in little circles because it just evens out all the grooves. I'm going to take my damp paper towel and wipe it off once again. This one is going to need a little more sanding, so I'm going to take the 800 again and still wet sand it. So that feels pretty smooth, and the last step is to take this steel wool and we're going to dampen this once again. And with the steel wool, we're going to do very small circles. This will give it a very smooth, very shiny touch when it's done. Going to wipe it off again. And I'm going to look at it through all angles to see. I look at this one and it has no grooves, no bumps. So the last step is to take the final coat. So once again, we're going to take our tacky cloth and we're going to wipe it off before we put any more coats on it. And instead of using this glue, we're going to move on to the final coat, which is, this is the one I'm using. There are multiple different final coats you can use, but this is the one I'm using today. I'm going to take this brush and I'm going to smoothly pull it across. This one you have to be very careful with, very smooth, because this will be the final coat that you're putting on your project. I don't like to put too much. I like to get it on there and then wipe it off just a little bit. We don't want too much on. And we're going to pull it very carefully. Make sure you get it on the edge, because you can always wipe it off with your paper towel, and you're going to pull smoothly. I'm going to add some more onto the tile, and I'm going to again smooth it, pull it smoothly across the surface. Again, you want to make sure it is past the edge so the entire tile gets coated. So I am now done with that coat, but as you can see, some of the final coat got on the side. So we're going to take your paper towel, and it's very simple. You're just going to wipe that off. If you happen to not wipe it off, you can always take sandpaper or sometimes even a razor blade just to carefully cut across the edge. This coat is very important to get done at least a month before fair, because if not, this coat won't cure in time, and the humidity will definitely make it a lot stickier and it won't be finished. So we're going to let this dry, and the last final step is to take steel wool and sand it. This is a coaster with the final coat already dried. We're going to take the steel wool after we dampen the tile, and we're once again going to take it and do small circles very carefully, since this is the final coat on the tile. When doing coasters, a lot of times we make multiple to make a set. When you make a set, just be very careful after putting the final coat on not to stack them until they're completely cured, otherwise they will stick together. I know when I did my second year project, I did the final coat on a memory game, and I stacked them before they were cured, and they did get ruined, and I did have to throw them away after fair because we could not unpeel them off of each other. So once you think this is done, you're going to take your paper towel and you're going to smoothly wipe across to get any of the excess off, and that will be it for the surface. Now the final touch is to finish off your projects. Judges do like a nice finished touch to your projects, so for this we're going to flip it over, and we're going to take these small felt circles and we're going to put them on all four corners. This is just to give it a nice finished touch, make it usable, make it look good. And that is it. This is the finished coaster. I would suggest doing this over multiple days, and just remember to try to get it done a month or two before fair so it can dry and cure in time. So these are a few of my projects through the past years. This is...
You can just...
I can just stand up.
Yeah, you can give it up.
Okay.
I'm on this camera right here.
Okay. So this is my sled that I did last year. This is definitely one of my favorite projects. I found it in my grandpa's barn. It was rusty and old, and it kind of just shows that you can decoupage anything. This took 50 coats, and you can see that there's different, these are all different types of paper that I stacked on top of each other. It took 50 coats to finish. This is my third year. In this one I used tissue paper. It was a different type of paper. This one I think took 50 coats as well, because of how many layers there were. And lastly, this was my fourth year project. It's a music stand. This one was definitely the hardest one. There's multiple layers. These are all different layers. The letters were printed out after. This one is the one I teared the paper to give it a certain look. This one took many coats and a lot of sanding. Do you have any questions?
You can go ahead and sit right
Okay.
now. I'll let a few seconds for questions to come in.
Okay. When doing this project, just make sure you pick something that you do enjoy, because it's a lot more fun to make something that you will want after fair.
You can go and end it.
Okay.
See any questions coming through.
Thank you for watching.